Hello, everyone. It is August 31st, 2021, and this video I'm recording after our fifth and for now final Jung meeting, our series of meetings based on Jung's texts. Today, around noon, I took part in an online session discussion group held by STOA, by my friend Peter Limberg. And the speaker for that event was Douglas Gillette. Douglas Gillette is one of the two authors of the famous book about masculinity and masculine archetypes, inspired by Jungian psychology. The title of the book is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. I probably got the order wrong, but it's a very famous book. I became aware of it a few years ago. I never actually read it in full, but it's an important book, and I kind of have a vague understanding of it. During that session today, I asked Douglas whether he agrees with my view of archetypes as kind of stable gravitational centers that we should use as reference points, but we shouldn't fall into them. We shouldn't see or regard our life narrative as moving towards one of these archetypes. For example, the archetype of a king, that my life consists of becoming more and more in line, compatible with this image of a king. He agreed with that, and he actually said that these archetypes are subhuman. They are less than a person, and we shouldn't allow ourselves, even though it is possible, but we shouldn't allow ourselves to be consumed by them. And the way he responded to my question seemed compatible with my view of archetypes in terms of gravity, in terms of pull, and the process of individuation has to do with being mindful of archetypes, but at the same time being in contact with the here and now, with the present moment, the realities of our lives. We should be formed by within an exchange with reality. And of course, it is good to be informed by our inheritances, our archetypes, patterns of behavior that have been cemented throughout our history, throughout our evolution. So in this video, I thought since today we had that Douglas Gillette event, I'll record this month's final video about Jung. I'm going to read a couple of passages from the texts, the second part of the Jung reader, and maybe add some comments. This first passage is about where archetypes come from. And actually somebody asked Douglas today, where do these archetypes come from? And he, with Jung, he said, we don't know. We don't know where they are coming from. They're enabled. They're partly enabled by our neurology, by our genetic predispositions, but they're also partly enabled by our culture. So where do archetypes come from? Let's read a little bit. Quote. So it is impossible for us to know the nature of the preconscious psychic dispositions that enable a child to react in a human manner. We can only suppose that his behavior results from patterns of functioning, which I have described as images. The term image is intended to express not only the form of the activity taking place, but the typical situation in which the activity is released. End quote. The term image here is being used in a very peculiar, very specific way by Jung. An image is both something that gives us a recognizable an access to a pattern of behavior, as well as the situation that brings about that that activity. So the archetype of a child or the archetype of a mother is not just a person doing certain things. It is also a situation, the maternal situation that goes with that, goes hand in hand with that pattern of motherly behavior. Next, in this passage, Jung is emphasizing the idea that we can look at archetypes as a process, something that is unfolding. And in general, psychic functions are not static images. They are not things that we can pinpoint in frozen in time, as frozen in time. Quote, since everything psychic is performed, let me repeat that. Everything psychic is performed. Since everything psychic is performed, enacted, something that is unfolded, this must also be true of the individual functions, especially those which derive directly from the unconscious predisposition. The most important of these is creative fantasy. End quote. What is important? Why creative fantasies are important? Because for Jung, these provide an internal clue, a set of clues that come from within us. If we are careful, these creative fantasies arise into our consciousness and give us the beginning of what we can do, clues about how we can bring more balance into our psychic life. Let's keep going. The next passage, quote, again and again, I encountered a mistaken notion that an archetype is determined in regards to its content. In other words, that it is a kind of unconscious idea, if such an expression is admissible. It is necessary to point out once more that archetypes are not determined as regards their content, but only as regards their form, and then only to a very limited degree. A primordial image is determined as to its content only when it has become conscious and is therefore filled out with the material conscious experience. End quote. This passage was why during our discussion, during our last discussion on Sunday, I brought in the form-content distinction and why it is useful. So psychic function begin with, not with content, not with a final message, like how a baby doesn't start by saying, I would like some milk, please. That's a clear message that we can convey like as a content. And the content could be rephrased and paraphrased, and you can express the content and try to express it in a different medium that you could regard as equivalent to the first expression. But when form is important, you don't have a content yet, the expression or the drive is trying to find itself. It's trying to find the content, like a baby who is uncomfortable, maybe is feeling cold or too hot, or is hungry, or needs to have their diaper changed. They cannot express a content, but what they are doing, their cry, has a form. And the more conscious they become, the more they develop, the more they become capable of expressing themselves. The form becomes more and more crystallized and becomes more and more into, it turns into a recognizable content. A work of art is open to consideration for similar reasons. You can't replace a work of art with a message. You can't say this work of art is expressing the value and beauty of motherhood, because the work of art is working with a form. It wants to engage our senses. It wants to engage our perception. And later, if we want, we can talk about it in terms of concepts and ideas. So the unconscious, what is in the unconscious, are not messages. There's no content in the unconscious. And when we have content, those are trying to correspond to these forms of expression. Okay, so here, this passage again, it is important for me because Jung is trying to clear up a possible misunderstanding. For him, it is a mistaken notion that an archetype is determined in regards to its content. So again, going back to Douglas's discussion of the four masculine archetypes: king, warrior, lover, magician. These are not things in the unconscious mind that we want to get access to. These are expressions that allow us to have access to the unconscious forms, not the other way around. So the formation of archetypes, or formation of the conscious content that corresponds to our archetypes, or the overt behaviors, patterns of behavior that corresponds to those unconscious forms, Jung, to describe them, uses the metaphor of crystal. And here, we should remember Tyson's point that Just because when you're using a metaphor, you shouldn't mistakenly see your metaphor like persuading you that just because crystals have certain properties doesn't mean that your point transfers automatically to an understanding of archetypes. So having that in mind, let's go and read this final passage. Quote, our comparison with the crystal is illuminating inasmuch as the axial system determines only the stereometric structure, but not the concrete form of the individual crystal. This may be either large or small, and it may vary endlessly by reason of the different size of its planes or by the growing together of two crystals that happen to be there. The only thing that remains constant is the axial system, or rather the invariable geometric properties underlying it. The same is true of the archetype. So there is a foundation that determines certain aspects of a crystal, its stereometric structure, but that does not determine how small or how large it is, or what happens if two crystals are forming alongside each other. Those are determined by the actual state of affairs at the time, similar to how individuation is not determined just by genetic dispositions. It's a coming together of many other factors. Back to the passage. In principle, it can be named, so the same is true about archetypes. In principle, an archetype can be named and has an invariable nucleus of meaning, but always only in principle, never as regards its concrete manifestation. In the same way, the specific appearance of the mother image at any given time cannot be deduced from the mother archetype alone, but depends on innumerable other factors. End quote. Let me go back to that last sentence and read it in a slightly different way. The specific appearance of the mother image at any given time cannot be deduced from the mother archetype. So an image cannot be reduced from the mother archetype, which is a conscious content. It's closer to like a conscious message, an idea. You cannot deduce an image from an idea. It's the other way around. We deduce the idea from the image. We deduce the mother archetype from the mother images. One more time. We deduce the mother archetype, the ideas about mother archetype, and this extends to masculine archetypes too. We deduce the ideas, the concepts, the archetypes of the warrior, king, lover, magician from the images, from the wealth of images that emerge into our conscious experience. We get an inkling about something going on in the unconscious. We are informed by the images primarily. So we cannot go from a study of archetypes back to the images, because the image is richer. It contains more. It carries more charge, more information, more meaning. And our ideas of archetypes are ways of discriminating, getting a handle on these images and our unconscious process, getting in contact, getting in touch with them. Okay. Well, I look forward to continuing our reading group discussions. I will post a public kind of announcement about Ernesto Laclau's book. And that's all for now. Thank you for your support, for your very valuable, inspiring, stimulating engagement with the reading group, and looking forward to next times.